to Talking Supply Chain. In each episode, top supply chain industry professionals and the nation's top thought leaders join host Brian Strait and share their unique insights to help supply chain managers stay one step ahead of their competition. This is Talking Supply Chain. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's episode of Talking Supply Chain. I'm your host, Brian Strait, and today we're talking leadership with a pair of thought leaders in the space. Radu Palamariu is the Managing Director of Asia Pacific and Europe for Alcott Global. He works with C-level and top management executives with Fortune 500 companies in the manufacturing, logistics, transportation, supply chain, and e-commerce sectors. Also joining us is Knut Alicke. Knut is a partner at McKinsey & Company and part of that firm's global supply chain leadership team. Welcome to you both, and I do hope that I get your names correct.
Good to be here.
Thanks a lot, Brian. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. To get started, could you each of you tell our audience a little bit about about yourselves?
Sure. So let me jump in. So Radu, based in Singapore, commuting on a regular basis in between Asia and Europe. By birth, Romanian. So that country that is famous for Dracula, gymnastics, and a few other things. But in general, these two tend to stand out. And been around supply chain operations for roughly 10 years. Alicke Global is an executive search firm, a recruitment firm, and we work with companies, as you rightfully said, Brian, around the world, around manufacturing, operations, logistics, and so on.
Yeah, and Knut, Alicke, and Brian, you got my name very well, so it's not so easy to pronounce my name. So congrats to that.
Well, at least if nothing else, then this has been a success for me today. So
Exactly, this strange Scandinavian name. Even though I'm not Scandinavian, I'm German. Yes, I would say I'm 30 years in supply chain. Got excited when I did my final study, so to say, master thesis, and then I started my PhD in that topic. And since then, working in supply chain, and since 20 years now in McKinsey, and here helping clients across different industries to improve their supply chain performance. And that can be in planning, that can be in physical flow, that can be in the organization, or how to leverage digital to be better. And what we always see over the years is clearly there's a lack of supply chain, I would say, talent, capability, and so on. So that's why I also decided to teach supply chain at the University of Cologne, where I teach an executive MBA for supply chain. So that's what keeps me busy.
Yep. Well, I mean, you guys are very busy, and you're in areas of the world that I would love to go visit someday, and I've not made it to, unfortunately, and hopefully I do someday. But I first got acquainted with you guys both earlier this year when I did saw something on a book that you guys have published called "From Source to Soul: Stories of Leadership in Supply Chain." Plug available from Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and many other retailers, so you can go buy it. It's a very good book. I would suggest if you're interested in leadership, go get the book. One of the things I found very interesting about the book is that while there are some of your own thoughts on leadership in it, what it really took the thoughts of a lot of different global leaders in here, and you kind of put it in their own words. So how did the concept of the book come about, and why did you choose the approach that you did for that?
So let me get started. We um, you will probably not believe. You will probably think that a guy from a consulting company and a guy from a headhunting firm are very structured and kind of plan this well ahead. The reality was that Radu and I did work together, kind of in on a conference presenting, and so we felt that both of us were really excited on supply chain. Both of us had the same feeling that supply chain is under evaluated, that we need to do something to help the supply chain community, all the network, to kind of get to the board, to be heard, to be listened to, that people understand what all of these people do. And then we discussed, what can we do? Should we do more presentations? Should we set up something else? And then we came up with the idea, why don't we talk to people who made it to the board with a supply chain background?
Yeah.
And the first one that comes to mind is clearly the CEO of Apple, right, Tim Cook. And then we kind of looked into maybe there's more. We also looked into how many CEOs do we have with a background, and we looked into the Fortune 200, and we found that it's only 11%. So back then, that was 2 years ago. It was only 11%, and we saw that that's not a lot. So we need to kind of help the community to change that, right? And then we said that why don't we pick a couple of successful people, successful leaders with a supply chain background that are now CEOs, COOs,
Mhm.
CPOs, so that made it to the board, and wanted to also make sure that this is, I would say, a diverse group from a industry perspective, from a region perspective. As you can see, we have quite a bit of women, but it's still male dominated. So that's also something we need to change.
Yeah.
And this is how kind of one thing came to the other, and then we started the interviews, and it was also for us very very insightful. And this is at the end how we ended up with 26 interviews.
Yeah. And you did, like you just mentioned. I mean, you talked to 26 different people for this, or that ended up getting published, I should say, in the book. You may have talked to more, I don't know, but they came from. It was an interesting mix coming from multiple countries, multiple business sectors, etc. Was it difficult to convince these high profile people to share their stories at all?
No, not necessarily. I don't. I think there is a some of them you've read about. Some of them are CEOs. Some of them are successful entrepreneurs. Some of them are chief supply chain officers or chief operations officers. So fairly broad spectrum. Not necessarily that it was that difficult. Now we didn't get Tim Cook or Mary Barra from General Motors, so maybe that you can argue it was more difficult to get to those kinds. But and we perhaps had a few that also passed on the opportunity because they were too busy. But by and large, I think people resonated with the idea, which was how to share with the world that you can make a very successful career from coming from supply chain, and to set some examples of how it was done and what was some of the key principles ultimately, because this is not a book about formulas of supply chain, it's not a book about technical supply chain, it's a book about leadership, and leadership is highly personal. Each of the 26 people have had their own career path, right? Some spent 40 years in one company, like Mike Corbo from Colgate. Some spent several or their careers took them across several companies. So you have many different ways to get to Rome, and Rome being ultimately a board level position, whether as the chief supply chain officer or a CEO. And what's quite heartening, the feedback that we get from readers is that you're going to resonate with some more than others, and that's the whole point of the book, because you're going to resonate with some of these careers more than you're going to resonate with others, because it's probably closer to you individually, to the reader's individual own journey and what they need to pick up and learn as a principle perhaps from the book. But that was
Yeah.
also our intent, to give a little bit of a menu list of options, right? And then the reader can take what best fits them at the point of their career that they're at.
Yeah, and it was one of the comments that I thought to myself too, was that every one of these stories is different, right? And how these people got there. And I
Agree.
think that shows you that we can all sit there and say, well, you got to do this, you got to do this, you got to do that in your career. But there really is no one path to where you want to get to. But it's so much about desire and the willingness to put in the work and do the things and to learn along the way, right? From everybody. I think everybody, a lot of the people in this book, the stories suggested to me that they were their journeys were formed by their interactions with others in many cases as well. For each of you, were there any particular stories that really resonated with you, and either in your journey or journeys that you've seen in others that you've worked with?
So I can get started. It's I would say it's a lot of the stories resonated, or parts of the stories resonated. Brian, you already mentioned that the aspect of learning, lifelong learning, and being curious to explore something new. That is what we heard by a lot of contributors.
Mhm.
And that is also something that clearly Radu and I are very, very interested. Otherwise, we would have not started this book. So to be open, to kind of evaluate, hey, what is out there, and always look for ways to improve. Always look for kind of new, whether it's new technologies, whether that's a new process, whether that's a new setup, to try to apply that. One of the contributors, she chief supply chain officer of a big company, even said that she kind of took a Python course in the summer. And when we then discussed, Python in your role, you're probably not really coding. No, but we need to understand what our young colleagues do, right? So
Yeah.
we need to kind of get into that. So that I found very interesting. Also, the reverse mentorship model that they implemented. What I also found interesting is a comment that Jim Rowan, now the CEO of Volvo Cars, made, where he said, "Look, back in Dyson, when he was managing the supply chain and then later on as a COO, CEO, there was always complaints about that. Oh, the sales guys, they don't get the forecast right, and we could be much better if only the forecast would be right." And then he said, "Look, guys, it is what it is. We probably can improve it a little bit, but just take this as the current input and make the best out of it." And this is kind of very, very important that we need to clearly also help our colleagues in adjacent functions to improve. But at the end, we first need to make sure that we take the environment as the environment is and set it up in a way that we are successful. And then we start with this kind of earning the rights. We then start to also improve focus security, for example. We then improve how we kind of work with our suppliers. Another contributor, said that, hey, collaboration is super important. He suggested to have the suppliers attending the SNOP meeting, and he said that he was nearly kicked out by his colleagues. They did not want to open up for the suppliers. And he said, like, look, these three suppliers are the most important suppliers that we have. So we depend on them. Why on earth should we not invite them and share our production plan with them? So here, convincing the colleagues and then opening up. And at the end, it was super successful. And all of these joint planning, this collaboration was super important.
Yeah.
Maybe
Yeah.
just to build a little bit on Knut. So whilst each story is quite unique, at the same time we looked at the commonalities of the interviews, and we came up with the model, the chain model. We came up with the name, of course, also to to be easy to be remembered. So each letter stands for something. So C stands for collaboration, H for holistic, A for adaptable, I for influential, and N for narrative. And these five elements are, if you want, the source of success that more or less came across in each of the interviews, of the five characteristics that are common, are fundamental to be a good, successful supply chain leader. And I don't believe that there's any sort of rocket science formula, especially when it comes to leadership or success or whatever. At the best, we can hope that we come up with a catchy name or phrase that makes it memorable. So if I'm sure that all of us have read the seven habits of the highly effective people, right, of Stephen Covey. I mean, it's not like the seven habits are actually mind blowing, but he did come up with this sketchy, right? The number seven is sketchy, and then the way that he
Yeah.
presented it, and it makes it easier to follow. So that's kind of our hope as well, and intention with the chain model, that it's five characteristics that are fairly easy to follow, and remember that of what makes a great supply chain leader. And particularly for supply chain, I mean, this ultimately this is these are fundamental that apply to leadership in general, but particularly to supply chain, the community in general tends to get over focused on technicalities, on jargon, on engineering side, on data and analytics, and all of that, of course, are critical if you're going to be a good supply chain professional. You need to look at the data, you need to understand the data, and all of that. However, to make it to the board, to make it to a C-level position, that is hygiene factor. That is basically fundamental, but not enough. And if unless you have the chain model characteristics, unless you have the leadership skills, unless you have the, for lack of a better word, the soft skills, you won't make it. So that's our hope, that the chain model provides a pathway and inspiration as well as a guideline to what it takes to be a true leader at the board coming from supply chain.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's, you talked about the commonalities and whatnot, and I think that's great. And I think when you read the book and you read the stories, you do see some of that, and I saw some of that. And the things that stood out to me were a little bit, there were a number of them that talked about breaking down silos. A number, I don't know, what number, 50% of the people talked about communication, and managing the communication part of it as being part of it. Others mentioned that there are not enough role models in the space, and that took me to, I think, when you guys started the book, right at the very beginning, you asked this very simple question, which is, why do you think that supply chain hasn't yet become the breeding ground for future top leaders the way some other fields have? And I think that's a valid question, right? Because when a supply chain leader is involved in everything in the organization, right? So why are they not running organizations as much as they are? Many of these people in the book have done this, or they're on their way to doing that. But from your perspectives, why do you think we haven't gotten to that? What kind of your thoughts on why we've not seen more supply chain leaders move into CEO roles, for instance?
So I'll start on this one, and I think it's a few things. So number one, it is indeed role models. So the more we're gonna get, and I think that number is increasing, and we're
Yeah,
seeing more and more now. Of course, it is a fairly low base, right? So I mean, and I don't know if at any point in time, nor is there an intention that we're gonna get 50% of the CEOs from supply chain. Maybe that's too high, right? So, but I think from 11%, maybe we can get to 20, 25, 30%.
yeah,
So I think for that to happen, role models are important, like in anything in this on this planet, right? Representation is important. The second thing that needs to happen, and equally, if not even more important, is mindset of the supply chain professionals. So I would argue that quite a few of the professionals don't necessarily believe themselves that they can be or they deserve to be CEOs. So whether you think you can or you think you can't, either way, you're right. It's what Henry Ford said, right, at some point. So it has to do with mindset, and there has to be an elevation of mindset of the supply chain professionals to own their power within organization, and power in a very positive way, right? They are indeed, supply chain is the nervous system of a company. It moves and pretty much orchestrates everything. That is extremely powerful and important. So they need to own that, and they need to also own the responsibility that comes with it to make a difference and be business partners. Um, as of today, there's two problems with that. So one, there's a population of supply chain professionals that are fairly tactical. They are not really strategic, right? So when you go to the CEO, and I'm literally now doing a chief supply chain officer search for a medical device company, and the CEO told me, "Look, Radu, I don't want a person that explains to me how he or she saved me money on a container. That's fine, right? But whether they saved me $50 or $30, it's not really mind-boggling or mission critical. I want to be able to increase how many patients I serve. I want to be able to increase how much business I do in a specific geography, and that's the crux of it. It's the difference between being tactically good in supply chain, right? And you can optimize your networks and optimize your manufacturing sites and all of that. But that does not necessarily mean that you're good at being a business partner to the CEO, to the board, and helping them increase business, helping them retain clients, helping them come up with maybe new products. That's a completely different angle to it altogether. So I think that's I'm talking about the mindset piece. So I think number one, role models; number two, mindset, and then of course there has to be number three. There has to be also an element in which supply chain professionals do need to upskill their chain model skills, for lack of let's keep using the same analogy we used in the book. The soft skills, the sales skills, the marketing skills, that's where there's a lack, a genuine lack, because we see CEOs coming from marketing, from sales, from finance. I think there's a need that supply chain professionals also need to up their game when it comes to how do you communicate, how do you influence, how do you sell an idea, how do you present, how do you sit in front of clients, right? And how do you make that happen for yourself? Because it's not necessarily, supply chain doesn't necessarily sit always in front. Most of the time, it doesn't sit in front of the clients, but you can work well with your chief commercial officer, your peers, and be there, because that's a side that you really need to be more exposed to in order to be CEO. So these are the three top of my head, and maybe Knut, you want to add.
Yeah, let me pile on. If we think about the education, if we start kind of, people come from school, right? Then they get to university, and what is it that they learn if they want to focus on supply chain? universities unfortunately teach a lot of theoretical stuff, right? So you don't find a lot of, let's say, sound, I would say, business wisdom, which supply chain is a lot of in universities. So these people then are experts in operations research, which is fine if you want to join a software company, right? And I always tell my students, look, the models you learn, the lot size optimization models or so, that's all fine. But 95% of my clients even don't know the simplest model itself. So there's other stuff that you need to understand. So these kind of young talents, they're educated in a way that is good for problem solving and everything, but not necessarily, as Radu said, as a business partner for the CEO.
Yeah.
Now, what do these people then start to do? They work clearly in an area which is very number driven, very nerdy, right? They love it. And then, as we also we have one example in the book. If you think about kind of a salesman, 10 orders, the salesman secured one, celebrating that one, not talking about the nine others, right? The supply chain guy coming over, 10 orders, nine perfectly delivered on time, customer super happy. One was 2 days late. The supply chain guy will talk about the late, right? So this is also kind of how you present yourself, how you explain the story, how you have the narrative for supply chain, and that is what people don't learn at university, and often they don't learn at companies when they start. So this is something that we need to start working on, and I try to work on this by kind of coaching people. I kind of teach at university, and I hope I don't teach the algorithmic part that's done by others. And with this, help people to get more into this business partner mode, and with this being more successful.
Yeah, and you mentioned universities. I think that's a nice segue into the next question I had, but it also ties to something I had a conversation with somebody the other day about this. Actually, we were talking about technology and supply chain space, and he was telling me that the respected leader in the space they're speaking with, and he was talking about the fact that the problem that they're having, they see that he sees, is that companies are investing in all this technology, but they're not investing in the people to know how to use the technology correctly, right? But the universities are teaching the people how to build it, how to use the technology, but not teach them how to make these sound supply chain decisions that you need to complement the technology, right? It's like there's a disconnect there, and the industry is wanting both basically, and they feel like the university is only giving half the equation, and they can't get that other half. And so that's a talent related question, right? And that it goes to my next question here too. And that Alcott Global has put out a couple of white papers. One of them is supply chain challenges over the next 12 months. And I think they're the typical things that you see in it: geopolitics, inflation, labor to be an issue. The talent shortage was noted by 50% of the respondents in that survey. And I've seen that. It's what I keep hearing over and over again: talent, talent, talent is the issue. And this goes to the hiring. And I think this goes to the broader theme from kind of your book, is why do we not get more supply chain leaders in the space, right? That are moving beyond supply chain and CEO roles and COO roles. And I'm wondering if the problem starts farther down the line. Are we not doing enough to get the young professionals into the career, right? To develop them, and in the book, a lot of these people work their way up, right? And this is what they wanted to do, and maybe we're not doing enough of that to get them promoted through their careers journey, if you will, to get them to the CEO type roles. What do you guys think about that? I mean, in order to solve the supply chain leader role, do we need to start much farther down the line, perhaps maybe even at the university level, and work our way up that way?
Knut,
Yes.
you're the professor.
So, sorry, let me get started. So, indeed, I teach them 25 years. And this is exactly why I teach, to make sure that at least kind of my class, and it's not kind of hundreds of people, very, very clear, but at least in my classes, I teach people what I think what is relevant for business. And we need to do much more of this, right? But here we have a systematic flaw in the education system, that professors need to publish. You can publish everything that has formulas. You don't publish on a nice concept that helps you to improve your supply chain. Same is true, by the way, for lean manufacturing. Same is true for procurement, right? We don't teach that at universities. We teach it at business schools, right? But there is much more people out there at universities and engineering degrees where we need to teach. So this is something where I would love to kind of build more of a network of people who go out to the university and then teach, and not teaching in a way that often you have kind of people joining from industry that kind of they have a presentation of half an hour. That's fine, but that's more kind of telling stories. But that's not from a lecturing perspective, not very structured, right? So you need to kind of do both. You need to kind of combine the academic part and the business part. And then you need to continue when these people join a company. You need to continue to coach them and develop them, and here then to help them to understand the business needs. And Brian, maybe also to your point on companies think that they buy technology and then solve all problems. Exactly as you said, our experience is that this does never work because people who are not educated, what they will do is they will not use technology. They will go back to their old habits, which is
Yeah.
often called Excel, and then they will do everything in Excel and then upload the result. That's very simple to find out. You just need to kind of look into how long did they log in, and you find out that for the 8 hour day job, only half an hour logged in. That does not make sense. But it makes sense if you download, do funky stuff, and upload again. So here we need to help people how to use this technology. Very important point.
Yeah. Yep, exactly. And building on that too. I mean, as you said, you talked about the university and training them, and but it's when they get into the careers, and you mentioned this, like we need to keep training them, right, and keep teaching them in the careers.
Yeah.
And the other white paper that I mentioned a second ago that Alcott put out was called "Be Your Own Success Story." Be your success story, I should say. And that focused on kind of on skills and controlling your own narrative in the supply chain. And that one found that 64% of executives say their primary challenge of recruitment is finding the candidates that possess the right skill sets. And I think this goes to what you're mentioning, right? Like, there's a disconnect there, and I think that also again ties to your book as well, right? I mean, the book kind of talked about this is kind of learning these career trajectories have to take place, and you have to learn these things along the way. So when the people get in the workforce, can you talk at all what you're seeing? Are companies not looking for the right talent? Are they not looking in the right places for the talent? Or are we just not doing a good job giving the future talent the skills they need to get to that next level in their journeys?
Look, finding talent is extremely difficult. That's why our business model is all about charging people to help find talent for them. So
Yeah.
there might be a plug in there, but yes, use Elcott Global for your recruitment needs. Now, on a serious note, uh, so we're in an interesting situation right now. Maybe to keep it practical, so we have a couple of clients that specifically asked us to get them candidates that come from outside of their industry. And the reason being for that, in particular, you have medical devices, you have pharmaceuticals, you have industrial companies. And the reason for that is that they tend to be in a situation of restructure where they've come to the realization that, okay, maybe if we get somebody from an FMCG background where they know what good looks like, because FMCG has very small margins, they can also help us transform in industries where perhaps the margins were historically higher.
Hmm.
And this ties into the point of, well, why do people struggle to find talent? Is well, one issue is that sometimes they're looking for more of the same, or they're very specific in their requirements. However, as I said, now there is a window of opportunity because the right talent is the person that can make transformation, that can make a restructure happen. We're heading to a pretty rough 2024, depending on which side of the world. The US still holds up quite okay for now. Europe is definitely in some sort of a recession. China is not doing great. So we're having some significant headwinds. So in situations of headwinds, companies do need to change a little bit their behaviors. And there, a lot of times, as a headhunter, I can tell you for sure that they are the masters of their own misery, which is, oh, I can't find the right people. Yeah, but sometimes you're looking for exact apple to apple, right? Of
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
you had, and you're looking, I mean, if it's not, blonde hair and blue eyes, it doesn't fit, which is hardly the case because most skills are transferable. Two, there is also a realization that you got to take some bets on people, and most corporations are risk averse. So again, I mean, the difficulty within finding the people is again within, typically within the same company. Like I'm just having a case with a particular company where they've interviewed 25, 24 different candidates from us, and they're still saying, oh, we haven't identified the perfect one. And at some point, 90%, 80% is good enough, so get on with it, right?
Yep.
I mean, you gotta take at some point a calculated risk and say, look, I think fundamentally this person has the right skills. Maybe it's lacking some level of experience and so on. I'm not saying, if you're a pilot and put the person to conduct an open heart surgery, right? I'm not talking about such things. But I mean, if you've done supply chain and if you've done procurement or planning and you put the person to do something in that field, take some bets on people. And secondly, thirdly, there's also realization that companies are fairly short-term oriented. So right now I have a couple of clients that have completely slashed training budgets, because again we're heading into a pretty tough year. Now if you stop training and you stop teaching your people, I mean 2-3 years down the line, and developing
That's,
your people, you're going to suffer.
yeah.
So it's all this combination of factors. There's not, I wish there was the formula for this. Is mostly common sense things. Unfortunately, common sense is not common practice. So my if I can try to extract some sort of advice or sharing session, is most things in this world we have, it's never been easier to learn. It's never been easier to learn, hence also why we put up be your own success story. If you're really driven, nobody stops you. Like, you have
Yeah.
YouTube, you have a million courses online, you can upskill yourself, right? And then companies do need to, and hiring managers do need to also be more open-minded to where can talent come from, and not necessarily fixated that if it is not blonde with blue eyes, it doesn't work.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'll throw my own two things in here too. And Knut, I think you might want to say something, but in my experience, I mean, I had a boss once tell me we were looking to hire somebody in a position, and my boss said, "Well, I don't want to hire somebody without at least 5 years of experience because I don't want to train them." It's like, so you're going to get somebody that's very set, they might be set in their ways, which might not be great for the organization either, because you didn't want to do the work to train them. But the other thing that I've noticed over time is that a lot of people, and I think it's just human nature, you know, how many people think they themselves are bad workers, right? I mean, we all think that we're a good worker, right? Nobody says, "Well, Brian, I believe that I'm a terrible worker. I'm the worst worker there is." So what you end up doing is you believe yourself as a good worker. So what you do when you go hire is you look for people that have the same traits and personalities that you think you have. So you end up with a team that's exactly like yourself, right? And then you end up with all these gaps and these holes in your organization because you don't have the people with the skills that you need to make a well-rounded team. So I mean that's kind of things that I've seen over the years. I assume that those things probably take place in supply chain as well. I'm sure. I don't know what you guys think of that.
Agree, and let me maybe add on. If I look into my clients where we do large scale supply chain transformations, we we always do some kind of coaching, capability building in parallel. We call this experiential learning, because what clearly does not work, and we see this unfortunately very often, is that, hey, we have this catalog of 800 courses, and you as a demand planner, you now pick course 15, 17, and 21. People don't get anything out of this, right? So you need to create an environment where everyone is eager to learn. And then, as Radu said, that the stuff is anyhow available online. Then you kind of look for papers, for YouTube videos, whatsoever, and then you get that. But that only works if you have at the same time a boss or some role model that takes time and coaches you. Right? So you cannot outsource that coaching. So think about a kind of a seasoned manager with 20 years of experience that coaches you and tries to kind of convey the skills that this manager did build over the last 20 years into something where you can take a shortcut, right? Because if all of us look at a problem or at a challenge, we immediately have an idea because of our experience. And this is when all the young people need to learn very, very fast. So all of this needs to be there. You need to have the environment. You need to have also the um, the eagerness to learn, and you need to have role models that help you to become successful.
Yeah. Yeah. And then again, I mean that all goes back to the book, right? I mean, and everybody in that book is a role model out there. So we are out of time, but I want to thank you guys both for joining me. For those of you listening out there, I strongly suggest you to go get the book. The book's called From Source to Sold: Stories of Leadership and Supply Chain. It's got some great stories. I mean, just from an enjoyment standpoint, you read the stories. It's nice to see some of the journeys that these people had and some of their experiences. But I guarantee you that no matter where you are in your career, whether even if you're at the top already, you're going to come away with some ideas that might help you. And if you haven't gotten there and you want to advance your career, there's some ideas, and you can pull kind of a path forward as to what, hey, if these kind of things can help me, and maybe I should do this as well. So a lot of good advice in it that you can take from that book. Again, thank you, Radu and Knut. Thank you so much for joining me talking leadership today. Greatly appreciated it, and our
Yeah,
time together. So
our pleasure.
Thanks
thank
for having me.
Yes, and thank you to everybody out there. Took time out of your day to listen to me and listen to our guests today. Greatly appreciate it. Until next time, I'm Brian Straight, and this has been Talking Supply Chain. Talking Supply Chain is produced by Supply Chain Management Review and Peerless Media. You can find it on scmr.com, supplychain247.com, iTunes, Google Podcasts, or wherever you find your podcasts. For more information on this topic or to sign up for our weekly newsletter, a print or a digital subscription to our publication, visit scmr.com. We hope you will join us for our next episode. For Supply Chain Management Review, I'm Brian Straight, and thank you for listening.